Hey everyone, I'm Richard, and well, we're finally here. The world of PS4 collides with virtual reality to give us this, PlayStation VR. Now, in theory, look, this just shouldn't really work. You look at the minimum spec for VR on PC, and we require GPU power a generation beyond what's on offer in Sony's console. So, can it really deliver a good experience? Well, we'll get onto that shortly, but first of all, let's take a look at what you get inside the box when you buy PSVR, how this thing plumbs into your existing PS4 setup, and well, whether it's actually comfortable to wear or not. First things first, at the bare minimum, you're going to require one of these, the PlayStation camera. Now, I actually got one of these in the box at the PS4 launch, and since then, Sony has refined the camera design, but it's still the same basic technology. Now, it's not essential, but highly recommended are these, the PlayStation Move controllers. Now, you're sort of moving into a 3D world here, and you have to have real presence there, and to do that, you need a 3D controller. Now, I've always liked the Moves, but they've spent the last year on our shelves up there, and before that, a couple of years in storage. So yeah, it's kind of nice to have them back in action. So yeah, unboxing PSVR, you're greeted with the customary VR breakout box, a big bunch of cables, and tucked away at the bottom the headset itself. And then the process of setup begins. It's all pretty straightforward really. You get a nice instruction sheet, the cables are labelled and numbered, so even the most dim-witted should have no problem setting things up. Essentially, HDMI and USB go to the breakout box. You get an extra HDMI for connecting the social screen to your HD TV, and then at the front here are the ports for the headset. By default, the cables on the headset are actually a bit short, but fine for desktop usage. But for living room play, Sony provides a long extension cable. In terms of the build quality of the headset itself, you can never bet against Japanese design and engineering, and I'd rank this as by far the most comfortable VR headset I've tested. It maybe looks a little over-engineered and plastic heavy compared to HTC Vive or Oculus Rift, but it's all about weight distribution. You press the button on the plastic band at the back here to loosen the grip, put it on, and then turn the dial there to tighten things up. The weight of the headset is distributed around your skull and onto your forehead via this rest here. But the genius of the headset is that it's not using straps to press your face against the screen. Instead, a button on the bottom here is used to pull the screen in and out. There's no pressure here, it just sits comfortably, and it's also good for momentarily leaving the VR world to check your surroundings. Oh yeah, and this is really by far the most comfortable VR system I've used for those wearing glasses too. You just have a lot more room in there compared to the Vive and the Rift. Audio? Well, that's taken care of via the Inline Remote we have here. It's a standard 3.5mm stereo jack, so you just slot your headphones right in there. Sony also provides some earbuds in the box to get the job done, and I'll be honest, I was pleasantly surprised at the quality level here. They're not awesome, but they do the job just fine. The remote itself has volume buttons, microphone mute, yes, PSVR has an inbuilt mic too, plus of course the all-important on-off button. Okay, so we're good to go, but one of the key things I wanted to test was just how good this thing is in the living room. HTC Vive has you kind of setting up your own VR cave, and you need a lot of space for many titles, whereas the Oculus Rift is more about desktop use right now. PlayStation VR? Well, this is a tricky one because Sony has to make VR work in the lounge. The social screen is a good start. Okay, so by default, the breakout box simply pipes through the standard PS4 feed to your HD TV. Turn on the VR headset and the screen transforms into a direct feed from the headset. Okay, so it does look a bit weird. Now, a standard VR feed, what's actually sent to the headset that is, looks something like this. I'm sure you've seen something like it before. The social screen takes one of those screens, crops out the peripheral vision, and then de-warps the result back into a standard 2D display that goes to your screen. The end result is that the center of the image looks okay resolution-wise, but the further out you go, the lower the pixel count. So you can get an idea of gameplay inside the HMD, but it's certainly not indicative of the actual experience. However, it does allow people in the room with you to get involved, and that's absolutely crucial to making this thing work for more than just the player that's wearing the headset. So just how does PSVR look in the headset compared to the competition? Well, the screen resolution is low. It's a 5.7-inch OLED panel in there with a 1080p resolution, 960 by 1080 per eye. That's not a lot of pixels for a screen that's literally strapped right up against your vision. But because it's a full RGB panel as opposed to the pentile arrangements seen on the other headsets, well, it kind of results in PSVR having less of a screen door effect than either Vive or the Rift, despite the immense pixel deficit. Resolution aside, the one minus point is that field of view isn't quite as expansive. It's not overly intrusive, but there's a kind of binoculars effect where you can see the boundaries of the viewport. The display updates are either 90 Hz like the Rift and the Vive, but most games run at 120 Hz. Well, that's actually 60 frames per second with a frame rate upscale to 120 FPS via a technique known as asynchronous time warp, which applies a kind of distortion feature to the image based on the last known motion coordinates from the headset. Resolution is indeed rather low compared to the competition, but at its best, it's not really an issue. I'm more concerned about specific games using subpar anti-aliasing, as the jaggies can be distracting. But other games that get it right, well, I wasn't really that fussed about resolution at all. I should say that once the headset is active, everything just gets piped straight through. The front end, normal games, everything. But at the end of the day, you're here for the VR games, right? PSVR gives you a demo disc that offers a bunch of titles to play straight away. And I believe the demos are going to be available to download from the PlayStation Store too. And this is actually quite important because the European disc has way fewer titles than the US one. Now, assuming the other demos aren't available in your territory, my advice would be to make a US account and you should be good to go in grabbing the lot. But regardless of territory, you do get some really interesting teaser content. I'd rate Drive Club VR and Tumble VR as the best of the lot in terms of the demos available, but VR Worlds has its moments too. And they work because they're the kinds of titles that just perform beautifully in virtual reality. Cockpit-based games always do well, while object manipulation logic titles like Tumble are just tailor-made for this kind of experience. And many of the games have actual depth too. They're real games, while many of the VR titles that I've played are kind of more like tech demos. Oh, don't get me wrong, PSVR has those too. Until Dawn, Rush of Blood is a pretty simple on-rails shooter, and other titles that are PC ports like Job Simulator, kind of more like tech demos too. And yeah, I think this may well apply to Batman Arkham VR. It's a series of mostly static scenes built around simple logic puzzles that you should be able to run through in around an hour. There's added Riddler content for more stability, but fundamentally it sort of demonstrates that standard gaming genres aren't always the best fit for VR. You kind of need to do something different. And one aspect, a really good VR moment that I really enjoyed in Batman was just one simple scene where you're looking at yourself in the mirror as you put the cowl on. It's kind of cool to see Batman looking back at you. But I guess fundamentally the question is this: does VR actually work on PlayStation 4? Now, the frame rate in all of the titles I've played so far has been absolutely rock solid, and they weren't in many of the preview games that I tested. Visuals are good too, it's just that the jaggies can be an issue in some games. Now, I've actually played Farpoint, an upcoming shooter, on both the standard PS4 and PS4 Pro, and I can tell you that the Pro version, well, it has a higher resolution, which does address the aliasing issues. I think by and large, PSVR works great, but I do have two issues. First of all, there's the PlayStation camera. No real problems in a desktop style environment, but in my living room, it quickly became apparent there's a kind of sweet spot around 1.5 meters away from the camera where it works really well. But I often found myself leaving that area and losing tracking, and that's a bit annoying, to be honest. And secondly, there's the PlayStation Move controllers. All games work without them, but the games that do support them are much, much better. Now, these things were way ahead of their time when they came out, but in the here and now, the tracking is kind of jittery when compared to the HTC Vive controllers, and there's also a problem of occlusion. So let's say that I turn away from the camera in a VR title and the moves aren't visible to the camera anymore. In that scenario, the system does a kind of best guess on where they are, and it's highly inaccurate. This was a bit of a problem for me in Arkham. And yeah, another problem, nausea. They just can't get away from it. Now, games like Batman or Tumble VR, they're basically stationary and no problem at all. But anything with fast movement, particularly lateral left to right movement, well, that causes problems. In particular, I'll draw attention to the VR Luge in VR Worlds. I couldn't even complete one level of this without feeling very, very ill. Whenever you hit the sides of the track, you get a massive jolt that causes issues. And the thing is that PSVR has a lot of games in its lineup that are all about fast movement. Drive Club, Rigs, Battlezone, and Stardust's new tank mode. Until Dawn Rush of Blood even has high-speed roller coaster sections. You're going to need an iron stomach for that one, I can tell you. Now, I played a good section of the launch lineup for 12 hours straight, and put it this way, it was brutal. And that's a concern for me. Oculus has its comfort rating. It lets you steer clear of purchasing games that might make you feel sick. PlayStation VR, on the other hand, it's sort of quite happy to drop you into the thick of it. Overall then, Sony has done a great job overall here. The quality of the headset in particular, it's second to none. The comfort level in that regard, it's just way beyond the competition. And even though the resolution on the actual screen is subpar compared to its rivals, well, in general usage, it's not really a hardware problem as much as a software problem. There are many games I've tested where the aliasing simply isn't an issue. And another good thing that this has going for it is that it's also the cheapest VR solution, but by extension it's not quite as polished. Tracking in the living room really isn't as good as I hoped it would be, for example, but really and truly, VR is all about immersion. It's all about presence, that feeling of being there. And in this respect, PSVR definitely delivers. And it's also good to see a robust library of games right from the off, plus bonus modes for upcoming big hitters like Tomb Raider, Call of Duty, and Star Wars Battlefront. Regardless, it may be the cheapest VR solution, but it's still a lot of money for a console gamer, especially with PS4 Pro just around the corner. So in terms of where you spend your money, well, decisions. Okay, well, that's where I'm going to leave it for now. If this video proved useful, do like and subscribe. I'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.